There are moments in life that change everything, moments you can't unsee, can't forget. I never thought my first time would be with my 72-year-old grandfather. It was unexpected, forbidden, and yet, it felt so right. I gave him a part of myself I had never given to anyone before. It was my first time, and it was with my grandfather. Looking back, I can't believe I'm sharing this, but you deserve to know my story. I grew up in a family of 5, my mom, dad, and 2 siblings. But most of my childhood was spent with my grandparents. My grandparents raised me until I turned 18, and those years were some of the best of my life. While my parents were often busy with their work, my grandparents filled my days with love, care, and wisdom. I adored my grandmother's laughter, how it would light up any room, and my grandfather's unwavering kindness. He was my world. He wasn't just a relative, he was my best friend. We did everything together. He would tell me stories late into the night, share his favorite music, and even teach me how to cook. We spent hours in the kitchen, laughing as we made dinner together. And when I needed someone to talk to, he was the first person I turned to. No matter what, he made me feel heard and loved. To me, he was perfect. He had this calm, steady way about him, and I always felt safe when he was around. It was like nothing in the world could go wrong when we were together. When my grandmother passed away, it felt like the end of an era. She had always been the heart of our family, her laughter, her warmth, the way she brought everyone together. Losing her left a void that none of us knew how to fill, but for my grandfather, it was unbearable. They had spent a lifetime together, and now he was left completely alone. He tried to stay in their home, surrounded by the memories they'd built together, but it quickly became too much for him to handle. My parents decided the best thing for him would be to move in with us. They wanted to make sure he wasn't alone and that he had family around to support him. I was secretly excited about the idea. Having grown up with my grandparents, I missed the comfort and familiarity of those days. It felt like a chance to have a piece of that back again. At first, everything seemed perfect. It felt comforting to have him around again, like stepping back into the happiest parts of my childhood. We were inseparable, just like before. We'd stay up late talking, sharing stories, and laughing about little things. I found myself confiding in him more than ever. He had a way of making me feel seen and understood in a way that no one else could. But over time, I started to notice subtle changes in how we interacted. It wasn't just the closeness, it was something deeper, something unspoken. I couldn't quite explain it, but there were moments that made me pause. The way he looked at me sometimes felt different, almost searching. The way his hand would linger just a little too long when he touched my shoulder or brushed a strand of hair out of my face. These weren't things I could articulate, but I felt them, and they stayed with me. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, telling myself that nothing had changed. After all, he was my grandfather, the man who had raised me, who had always been my rock. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something between us was beginning to shift in ways I didn't fully understand. We started spending more time alone together, just like when I was younger. Late-night conversations stretched longer than usual, quiet walks in the garden became our routine, and he would sit beside me during the evenings, when everyone else had gone to bed. It all felt so familiar, safe, like it always had been. But as the weeks went by, something began to shift, and I couldn't ignore it. I began noticing details about him I never had before. The way his laughter would trail off when his eyes met mine, as if he was searching for something deeper. The way his voice carried a warmth that seemed reserved just for me. Even his presence felt different. He was still the same kind, loving man I had always known, but there was a closeness between us now that felt more intense. There were moments that stopped me in my tracks. Like the time we were sitting together on the couch, watching an old movie he loved. His hand brushed against mine, just slightly at first, but then he left it there, resting gently on top of mine. I froze, unsure of what to do. I told myself it was nothing, just an innocent gesture, but the way my heart raced betrayed me. I couldn't understand why I felt this way. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He was my grandfather, the man who had always protected me, the man I trusted more than anyone. I tried to convince myself that these feelings were just misplaced love, that I was overthinking everything. But no matter how hard I tried to push it away, it kept coming back. And then there were the looks. He would look at me sometimes, not like a grandfather looking at his granddaughter, but like something more. His gaze would linger, his eyes soft and thoughtful, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't. Those moments left me feeling confused, even scared. I wanted to ask him about it, to make sense of what was happening, but I was too afraid of the answers. My internal struggle was overwhelming. I found myself questioning everything. Was I imagining it? Was I misinterpreting his actions? Or was there something really changing between us? Deep down, I knew the truth, but I couldn't bring myself to face it. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing you shouldn't look down, but unable to resist. The worst part was how much I began craving his attention. I looked forward to our late-night talks, the way his hand would rest on my shoulder, the quiet moments where it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Every time he smiled at me, I felt a warmth that both comforted and terrified me. I knew it was wrong to feel this way, but I couldn't help it. And that scared me more than anything else. It happened on a quiet evening, one of those nights when the rest of the house seemed to fade into silence. We were sitting on the couch, just the two of us, talking like we always did. The glow of the television flickered in the background, but neither of us was paying attention to it. I remember feeling an odd stillness in the air, as if the moment itself was holding its breath. He reached out and took my hand. At first, it felt normal, familiar, the kind of gesture that had always brought me comfort. But then, his grip tightened ever so slightly, and he began tracing small circles on the back of my hand with his thumb. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of heat rise in my chest. I told myself to pull away, to make an excuse and leave the room. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed there, frozen and unsure, as his touch lingered longer than it ever had before. He turned to look at me, and in his eyes, I saw something I couldn't explain. It wasn't just love, it was deeper, more intense, and it made me feel both exhilarated and terrified at the same time. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to move away, to stop him. But I couldn't. It was like every part of me was drawn to him, and I didn't want to fight it. When his lips finally met mine, it was soft, hesitant, as though he was just as unsure as I was. But neither of us pulled away. But as the kiss deepened, it became something neither of us could deny. I felt his hands on my face, then sliding down to my shoulders, pulling me closer. My heart raced, my thoughts a blur of emotions, fear, guilt, and a longing I didn't understand. What happened next felt like a dream, a moment suspended in time. He guided me gently, his touch both firm and tender, and I didn't resist. Every part of me felt alive, every nerve on edge, as if I were experiencing something new and forbidden. We moved together in a way that felt surreal, as if the world around us had vanished. I gave him a part of myself I had never given to anyone before. It was my first time, and it was with him, my grandfather. The emotions were overwhelming, a mix of confusion, fear, and something I couldn't quite name but couldn't deny. When it was over, I sat there in silence, my mind racing. I felt everything at once, guilt, confusion, fear. But beneath all of that, there was something else, something I wasn't ready to admit to myself. I felt connected to him in a way I never had before, a way that felt both forbidden and undeniably real. I wanted to cry, to scream, to undo everything that had just happened. But at the same time, I didn't want it to end. I hated myself for feeling that way, for wanting more, even though I knew it was wrong. I knew I should leave the room, put distance between us, and pretend it never happened. But I couldn't move. All I could do was sit there, replaying the moment in my mind and wondering what it meant for us, for me, and for everything I thought I knew about myself and my family. I thought the guilt would swallow me whole after that night. I expected to wake up and feel disgusted, to push everything aside and pretend it never happened. But that's not what I felt. Instead, I found myself longing for him, craving his touch, his closeness, in a way I couldn't control. Every time I saw him, my heart raced, my body betrayed me, and I couldn't look him in the eyes without remembering everything. I tried to tell myself it was a moment of weakness, a mistake that could never happen again. But deep down, I didn't want it to end. I would catch myself staring at him, watching the way he moved, the way he smiled. I knew every detail about him, but now, those details took on a new meaning. It wasn't just admiration, it was desire, raw and unrelenting. I hated myself for feeling that way, for wanting something so wrong, but I couldn't stop. The tension between us was unbearable. He would glance at me across the room, and I could feel the electricity in the air. A fleeting touch on my shoulder, a moment where our hands brushed, it was enough to set my skin on fire. Every small interaction felt loaded, as if the world had narrowed down to just the two of us. But it wasn't just about us. My family was always there, moving around us, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. My mother would ask me to help him with something, and I'd feel a pang of guilt so sharp it took my breath away. How could I look her in the eyes, knowing what I had done, knowing what I still wanted? I started avoiding him, trying to create distance to protect myself and my family. But the more I tried to stay away, the stronger the pull became. Late at night, I'd find myself lying awake, replaying every moment we had shared, every touch, every word. It was like a fire I couldn't put out, no matter how hard I tried. The worst part was the secrecy. It felt like I was living a double life. On the outside, I was the dutiful daughter, the loving sister. But inside, I was falling apart, consumed by desires I couldn't admit to anyone. I was terrified that someone would notice, that they would see the way I looked at him or the way he looked at me. And yet, a part of me didn't care. A part of me wanted to throw caution to the wind, to let myself feel everything without holding back. But I knew what was at stake. If anyone found out, it would destroy my family, shatter the life we had built together. And that thought kept me awake at night, trapped between what I wanted and what I knew was right. I couldn't keep going like this. Every day felt like a tightrope walk, balancing between the life I was supposed to live and the desires I couldn't suppress. Every glance, every accidental touch, every moment alone with him felt like I was inching closer to a cliff I knew I couldn't come back from. The guilt was suffocating. I loved my family, but the secret I carried was eating me alive. I felt like I was living a lie, pretending to be the perfect daughter, the perfect sister, while hiding this unbearable truth. And him, he was always there, a constant reminder of everything I had done and everything I still wanted. It reached a point where I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. I hated what I had become, this person who betrayed the people she loved, who risked everything for something that could never be right. But at the same time, the thought of walking away from him felt like ripping out a part of my soul. One night, I sat alone in my room, staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I knew I couldn't stay. Every moment near him was a temptation I wasn't strong enough to resist. And if I gave in again, it would ruin everything, my family, my future, and any chance I had of forgiving myself. I had to make a choice, and it felt like no matter what I did, I would lose. If I stayed, I risked destroying my family and everything we had built. But if I left, I would be walking away from the one person who had always been my safe place, my world. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but I knew it was the only way to save myself. When I finally told my parents I wanted to move to a different city, I gave them a half-truth. I said I needed a fresh start, a chance to find myself and figure out what I wanted in life. They believed me, and I hated myself for the lies, but I couldn't tell them the real reason. How could I? Leaving felt like tearing myself in two. As I packed my things, I thought about all the memories we had shared, his laughter, his warmth, the way he always knew how to make me feel safe. And now, I was walking away from all of it. It felt like losing a part of myself, a part one wasn't sure I'd ever get back. But as much as it hurt, I knew it was the right thing to do. Staying would have destroyed us both, and I couldn't live with that. Leaving was my escape, but it was also a loss of something forbidden, something I could never have, but something I would always carry with me. As the train pulled away from the station, I felt a strange mix of relief and heartbreak. I was free from the temptation, the guilt, the lies. But I was also leaving behind a piece of my heart, a piece I knew I could never reclaim. Looking back, I'm still torn. The emotions I felt were real, there's no denying that. But what scares me the most is how deeply I felt for him, how impossible it was to simply shut off my desires, my connection to him. In my heart, I know it was wrong. I know it was a mistake, one that changed everything. But even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel him, still remember the moments that felt too powerful to ignore. What I've learned through this is that love doesn't always fit into the neat, safe boxes we try to place it in. Sometimes, love comes in the most unexpected forms, and when it does, it's confusing, overwhelming, and often painful. It can blur the lines between right and wrong, and it makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself and your relationships. But I also know that love doesn't give us the freedom to disregard the boundaries that hold us together as a family, as a society. Sometimes, love requires sacrifice. Sometimes, we have to let go of what we want for the sake of protecting what really matters, our relationships, our futures, and our peace of mind. Leaving was the hardest decision of my life. It was a sacrifice I wasn't sure I could make, but I knew it was the only way to keep my family intact, to preserve the person I wanted to be. I can't undo the past, and I can't forget the feelings I had, but I've had to come to terms with the fact that some things are too dangerous to act on. I still carry the weight of what happened with me, but I've learned that sometimes we have to make choices we never imagined we'd have to make. We have to face the consequences of our actions, no matter how painful they are. And we have to move forward, even when the past feels like a part of us that we can never escape. This was my story, a journey through forbidden emotions, tough choices, and the consequences of decisions I never thought I'd face. But now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Do you think love can ever truly be wrong if it feels so real? Let me know in the comments below, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the next story, where we dive into life's most complicated moments and the lessons we learn along the way.